Hello everyone, this is CoolPro195 and welcome to my Elgato game capture 4K 60 Pro recording test at 4K at 60 frames per second, and what better way to test out with than Crash Bandicoot and Sane Trilogy for the PS4 being played on a PS4 Pro. And I gotta say, this looks so amazing, and even watching this intro in 4K just makes the experience all the more better. And if I was able to experience this like 4K prestigiousness on the day the game came out, man, would I have been mind blown. But you know, it's all thanks to a trick that I have managed to work out, considering due to how my setup is, I don't have an actual display that supports 4K through HDMI, so I've had to find some workarounds. But anyways, let's jump right into Crash Bandicoot and Sane Trilogy in 4K 60 frames per second prestigiousness. Well, according to Vicarious Visions, the developers of this AAA remastered trilogy, at maximum, this product on the PS4 Pro can only go up to 4K at 30 frames per second, but you know, it's really not much of a problem that it just goes up to that much at maximum, because the original was only at 30 frames per second anyway, so it doesn't really take much away from the gameplay experience. But at the same time, it would have been much better if it was like 60 frames per second at 4K. Although you can get 60 frames per second at 1080p, so probably it looks like it's sort of transferred over, but you know, 60 frames per second would actually compensate for response time, which is really essential when it comes to gameplay. I'll just let you watch the cutscenes in prestigiousness.
But Dr. Cortex, we haven't determined the cause of past failures.
Moron! This Bandicoot will be my general. He will lead my Cortex commandos to world domination. This time, I shall reign triumphant. We are closer than ever before. Quickly, into the vortex.
Dr. Cortex, the vortex is not ready. We have no idea what it could do.
Failure again. Capture him!
Uh-oh.
Prepare the female Bandicoot.
Man, that cutscene looked fucking amazing in 4K. And you're just about to see Insanity Beach load up in 4K, as you see before you. But I remember when the first ever 4K footage was actually revealed, like for gameplay of Crash Bandicoot and Sane Trilogy, and that looked amazing. Even like before the game came out. And you know, this is enhancing the whole PlayStation experience, 2016 experience, that I had back when they first announced Crash Bandicoot and Sane Trilogy, like as in, you know, the footage reveal. And now here I am playing the game in 4K with a 4K capture card. It's just so fucking amazing. Now, to explain why it actually took some time to get this set up, to actually get to recording in 4K, was, you know, it was only like a matter of time and, you know, procedure and process in order to get this actual setup working. Because based on my setup, as I mentioned before, I only have, like, all my displays like only support 1080p at maximum through HDMI. So therefore I needed an AvenView HDMI splitter, a HDMI 2.0 splitter for that matter, as that supports full 4K signal, in order to actually bypass this as well as record it. So essentially, what I was doing with the AvenView is that this AvenView HDMI 2.0 splitter essentially splits the signal into two different outputs to output two different types of signals through two different HDMI slots. There's one slot that outputs a full 4K uncompressed signal, while the other output slot outputs just a downscaled 1080p signal in order to compensate for those displays that don't support 4K. And it's really essential for my setup because since I don't have an actual display that supports 4K through HDMI, I can't actually get, you know, an instant real-time preview to look at without it, unless I manage to trick my 1080p displays into thinking they're getting a 1080p signal, which I actually did with my AvenView HDMI splitter. So essentially, it's been tricking my TV into thinking it's getting a 4K signal. I mean, tricking it into thinking it's getting a 1080p signal while it's actually getting a 4K signal. And funnily enough, for this setup, you may find it a surprise, but I'm actually using two capture cards now simultaneously, or simultaneously, however you want to put it. So effectively what I'm doing is that I'm using my Elgato Game Capture 4K 60 Pro in order to actually record all the 4K footage, all this prestigious 4K footage on the 4K capture utility that you download specifically for 4K recordings, as the original Elgato Game Capture software does not support 4K resolutions in order to be captured at. So they had to make a separate software that's dedicated to 4K recordings, which is also understandable because 4K is, you know, a completely different ballgame to 1080p and 1440p, so there's that. So while I'm actually using my 4K 60 Pro to actually do the actual 4K 60 frames per second recordings, I'm also using my Elgato Game Capture HD60S in order to get the instant preview on my monitor, which is actually an essential help. Although there's also another workaround to this, because I've tried with both Elgato Game Capture softwares running simultaneously, and turns out you can't actually have both the 4K capture utility and the original Elgato Game Capture software running at the same time if you want to record the 4K footage, because if you do, then it results in no recording happening whatsoever. So if you have them both open at the same time, you will not be able to record your actual 4K recording from your 4K 60 Pro. So therefore, in order to bypass this, you're gonna have to use OBS for the instant preview with the associated with the Elgato Game Capture HD60S, which is actually the preview I'm looking at right now, which is essentially previewing on my 4K monitor, so I get the best of both. But yeah, it's ironic how my 4K monitor doesn't support 4K through HDMI, but only through DisplayPort, which is actually what I'm using my 4K, which is actually what I'm using my gaming PC to output to. I'm outputting it from my Gigabyte Nvidia GeForce GTX 1080 Founders Edition graphics card to my actual 4K monitor through a DisplayPort cable, the DisplayPort cable that is actually provided with my 4K monitor. So yeah, it's ironic how I still had to do workarounds even though I did technically have a 4K display in my room. But you know, I'm happy for this workaround as well, because essentially I managed, with my Avon View HDMI splitter, I managed to trick both my Elgato Game Capture HD60S and my TV into thinking that they're both just getting a 1080p signal. Therefore I can actually get an instant preview bypass for real-time footage to look at while I'm actually recording. And the reason why I needed the bypass for the real-time footage to actually look at was because if you actually look at the 4K capture utility for the actual 4K recordings, there is a slight delay. Like, the delay is at least like a split second to a full second, give or take. But you know, even like, I know it may not sound like much, but even some input delay is still not good for the, a player's experience. It's like common knowledge for a gamer to know that, if you want to be able to play a game and look at a preview, you obviously want everything to respond on time to what you're doing. So that's basically the entire reason I managed to set all this up. Although before I was only able to manage to get 4K, I was only able to play in 4K and not be able to record, because this was just early testing phases. And as I was just testing this out, like before it was just all theory to me. So essentially, basically, during test phases of actually getting this whole setup to work in recording and playing 4K at the same time, during test phases I could only manage to at least play with like an instant preview of 4K signal, even though the devices are being tricked into getting 1080p signals, which is actually quite impressive. Considering like the output slot, considering like the full 4K signal output slot from my Avon View HDMI 2.0 splitter was only outputting sound and no actual, visual display to my capture card. Therefore I had to purchase a separate capture card, not a capture card. I had to purchase a separate HDMI splitter, which is a different kind of HDMI splitter, that actually outputs like multiple uncompressed 4K signals. And that's how I managed to get this to work, and turns out my theory was correct. So now, here I am, doing the practical phases. And it's impressive even looking at the game on the big screen in my room, considering I got that TV back in 2013 on my 18th birthday as an early birthday present, which was actually months before 4K even became a thing, before 4K TVs and displays in general were even announced. So yeah, 2013 was pretty much just the start of 4K. So it's really impressive how I managed to get it to work, and even looking at it now, it looks so smooth. I mean, I know that Vicarious Visions did say that it only goes up to 4K at 30 frames per second at maximum with Crash Bandicoot and Sane Trilogy, but just looking at how smooth all the animations are, especially the water animations, like the water effects and the animations put together, it looks so smooth. You would definitely think it's like fucking 60 frames per second. So yeah, this is really impressive for what it's worth. But although the only drawback is that there's no actual, the only drawback is that you can't get HDR or like RGB or 4K RGB signal through the HDMI splitter, through the Avon View. But then again, it's sort to be expected, but not really. But anyways, I'm happy with still getting the YUV, like the 4K YUV 420 4K signal. It's decent enough, and at this point I really couldn't ask for any better. Just couldn't ask for more. It just looks so amazing. Now a 4K playthrough of Crash Bandicoot and Sane Trilogy must be done on my channel now. It must be done. And it'd be easier to do as well, because then I won't even have to commentate. So I won't have to deal with any extra resources alongside. Anyways, now for Papu Papu, the piss easy boss fight. So yeah, now I can finally put a full 4K recordings in general in action as well. So yeah, including Crash Bandicoot and Sane Trilogy, a 4K playthrough of this game, of this AAA remastered trilogy must be done. It's what it deserves on this channel. And just like that, we're beating Papu Papu, a piss easy boss fight. Now, I can't remember if I actually skipped that second bonus round in a Great Gate, but if I did, it doesn't matter, it's just a test. Anyways, that basically puts this recording test to an end, and I really hope you guys have enjoyed this special recording test that I've cooked up for you guys. And now just looking at the actual 4K capture utility, it does look much better than the actual preview, but you know, it's to be expected since the preview's getting a downscaled 1080p signal. But yeah, that's essentially it. Now anyways, I hope you guys have actually enjoyed this prestigious 4K 60 frames per second recording test, even though Vicarious Visions do say it only goes up to 4K at 30 frames per second at maximum. But fuck that shit, it doesn't really matter. This recording is 4K at 60 frames per second, and it looks smooth enough in order to fit the bill. So anyways, that's essentially this recording test coming to an end. I hope you lot enjoyed this. I hope you all enjoyed it. See you lot in my next upcoming project. Feel free and be sure to subscribe, like or rate, however you want to put it. Drop a comment below to leave feedback. Constructive feedback, if you will. And share it around with your friends and family, whoever they may be. Now one last thing I'd like to say is Merry Christmas for the past few days, for those who celebrate it, and for those who don't celebrate it, Happy Holidays. And see you lot in my next upcoming project, whenever it may happen on this channel. Laters everyone, peace out.